Section 121 deals with state use of asset forfeiture. And like a lot of the provisions in here, there's restrictions as a piece of federal legislation on what we can do to tell the states what they can and can't do. In this case, is the Fifth Amendment clearly says that civil asset forfeiture is kind of repugnant to the Fifth Amendment. Section 121 includes a finding that Congress has the obligation to prohibit the use of civil asset forfeiture by the states. And so the way that Section 121 sets that up is setting out procedures to say that a person property can only be forfeited if there's a criminal conviction of a person for a violation of state criminal law, or there's been a civil proceeding that the state proves that the person has committed an offense, and the person who owns the property gets all the protections that are applicable to criminal defendants, including a trial by jury and the ability to be represented. So states can technically still use civil asset forfeiture under those limited circumstances. If they try to do it if they do it any other way, any person who's aggrieved by it is given the right to bring a federal cause of action in federal court to get relief, including return of the property and enforcement of those procedural protections. In Justin Amash's bill, he has a long list of findings. And while they're not included in the Blueprint for a Better America, I would like to read some of them just to sort of establish how Congress has the ability and the duty to end the practice of civil asset forfeiture. And so he wrote that Congress finds that the long-term failure of Congress, presidents, and the judiciary to recognize the illegitimacy of the government's civil asset forfeiture practices do not divest them of the authority to do so. The government cannot lawfully jettison the rights of the accused for the sake of convenience and profit. The early use of civil forfeiture in the United States was limited to admiralty and revenue contexts in which the existence of a legal violation and the identity of the property used to effect it were often self-evident, and the owner of the property to be seized was often unobtainable. Although these limitations don't prevent those practices from being constitutionally infirm, they do materially distinguish the early practices from modern civil forfeiture. Modern civil use of forfeiture is not limited to admiralty or revenue contexts. Its reach extends far beyond property used to commit an offense and is often used to supplement rather than recover the government's revenues. The tortured status of civil forfeiture in current law, in which the fiction of the property as the defendant is sustained, yet the interests of property owners are, to a limited extent, nonetheless recognized, is the inevitable result of grandfathering civil forfeiture into a constitutional system that otherwise secures the rights of the accused. You know, in a lot of the civil asset forfeiture is on the state level. And according to the Drug Policy Alliance, 80% of the time, there are no criminal charges filed when property is seized. And sometimes it's really abusive and even seems targeted. An armored car company, Empriol, recently filed suit just this month because in the last year, their armored car vehicles have been stopped. There's been no arrest. There's not even been traffic tickets, but more than $1 million in cash has been seized from their armored cars. And this is pretty, this is kind of like, this is highway robbery. And it's unrelated, this section, but the problem that these armored companies are solving, which is legal marijuana dispensaries who are prohibited from using the banking system and have lots and lots of cash from their customers. They're using armored cars to get the money, to move the money around. And so the Blueprint for a Better America will solve that root problem by lifting the banking prohibition so that all legal businesses can use the banking system. A couple other things. The Supreme Court ruled in 2019 that they put an upper limit in some of these civil asset forfeiture cases. In the case of Tyson Timbs versus Indiana, Timbs he pled guilty to selling a few $100s worth of drugs, and then the state seized his $42,000 Land Rover that he bought from an inheritance after his father had passed. And the Supreme Court unanimously agreed that this was an excessive fine. Fining someone $42,000, a few $100s worth of drug sales was excessive, prohibited by the Eighth Amendment. And the Supreme Court unanimously agreed that that protection applied to the states. According to USA Today, since 2014, 36 states in the District of Columbia have taken steps to scale back their civil asset forfeiture. 4 of them have actually abolished it. And I guess I want to close with one more story. It's from last year, February 2021, and a man named Stephen Lara. He's a Marine. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's a father, and when he was traveling from Texas to Nevada to visit his daughters, sometimes he takes his savings with him rather than leave his savings in his apartment at home. And so the Nevada Highway Patrol pulled him over for allegedly passing too close to a tanker truck. And I put a link to the video in the description below so you can see the body cam footage of the police. They're finding the money where Stephen told them it was, in his trunk. They're finding the $87,000 with the bank receipts accounting for it, and then just deciding, well, let's just take the money. Let's take his money and give it to the DEA so that they could get a share, and they did. And there's just something really Orwellian about how this is playing out, this guilt by suspicion, that you could be punished for this suspicion without due process of law. And if you watch that video, you'll see Stephen offering sympathy to these officers as they leave him on the side of the road with no money for gas to get home, no money to buy meals for his kids. He tells them, I know you're just doing your job. I know you're just doing your job. Well, if this is your job to take people's money on the side of the road, your job is wrong. We can fix that. We can build a better America that gets rid of that sort of work. We have the ability to stop this by unionizing as voters. And that's why addressing civil asset forfeiture is an essential part of building a better America. Next, Chair, I think that concludes my testimony for Section 121, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question that's actually related to civil asset forfeiture generally. So this applies to both Sections 120 and Sections 121. In most of these cases, you've been talking about seizing cash. You had mentioned an example where somebody's personal vehicle was seized. But when we talk about civil asset forfeiture, what is the range of what counts as a civil asset that could be seized?
Pretty broad. It just needs to be sort of connected to some sort of crime. Example, I forget what state it was. I think South Carolina. Guy in his RV, they found a couple ounces of marijuana. And so they seized the RV saying, well, that's the container that you were storing the marijuana in. So we're taking the container. And, and so he had to go fight to try and get his RV back. There was a report in Massachusetts recently looking at civil asset forfeiture. And in many cases, the very minor amounts of money that police are seizing, essentially, telling people to just turn over the money that they have on them and claiming it as forfeiture. In some cases, less than $1, literally taking the spare change from people's pockets and saying, oh, this is forfeit, but you can sue us to try and get it back. It's quite a large range. It also can be used against property. If you're perhaps if you're suspected of growing marijuana on your property, law enforcement can try and seize that property. So civil asset forfeiture, all sorts of property. If you dig into the existing statute that's being repealed, 981, there is a long laundry list, and it includes things like being accused of vehicle identification numbers. Like if you're accused of changing the vehicle identification number on a vehicle, then that is grounds for civil asset forfeiture. The Supreme Court has repeatedly and consistently upheld civil asset forfeiture. and said this is constitutional because, again, due process of law. Congress wrote a law saying that it's okay to do this. And so that's due process, which is why the solution, why, fighting this in court and everything is good and everything. But the real solution is to change the law, which we can do with this federal legislative package.